Hi there. Welcome to this week's edition of Telile 24/7. I'm your host, Adam Cooke. Now, the show might look a little different this week, but we're still going to have a lot of conversation that you might be interested in hearing. For starters, in just a few minutes' time, I'll sit down with Cape Breton-Canso MP Mike Kelloway. He's going to tell us about the federal government's latest opportunities to help out Canadians and local residents during this stage of the COVID-19 pandemic. But we have a very special theme running through the episode this week. June is Pride Month, and that's one of the reasons that I'm here right now at the Nova Scotia Community College Strait Area campus. You see, this is one of two locations in Port Hawkesbury where there's a rainbow crosswalk to show alliance with the LGBTQ community. There's another one over at Sarek, and a third is being put together in Port Hawkesbury even as we speak at a yet-to-be-determined location. We're going to discuss Pride issues and LGBTQ issues through the show. In just a few minutes, you're going to see Telile 24/7's first ever Pride panel, featuring people from different parts of the Strait area, some still living here, some having moved away, who are going to share their own experiences about being LGBTQ in rural Nova Scotia. But to begin this week, I've asked a very special friend of Telile 24/7, Taylor Linloff, to share a commentary about how the modern Pride movement actually began. This isn't necessarily talked about an awful lot, so we thought it was important to share this information with you. Taylor, take it away.
In the United States in the 1950s and 60s, it was illegal to be caught engaging in what was known as homosexual activity, which ranged anywhere from cross-dressing to drinking and dancing with the same gender. Homophobia and transphobia were so violent and normalized in society that the mafia was often paid to protect the bar patrons. Police took bribes from gay and trans people as to not expose their supposed crimes to the media, mainly newspapers, as a means to humiliate them, ruin families, and leave them jobless, destitute, and alone. On June 28, 1969, in the Stonewall Inn, which was a well-known gathering place for New Yorkers who were LGBTQ, homeless youth, sex workers, drag queens, and other marginalized people, which at the time was, in fact, ran by the mafia. There was a police raid, not unusual, at 1:20 a.m. with approximately 205 people at the bar at the time, leaving people to run and flee for their safety, whether it be physical, emotional, or societal. But as a crowd began to gather around the bar, they were surrounded by the police. It suddenly grew eerily quiet. As the lights went up, they were escorted out of the bar. They began being loaded into the police trucks like they were cattle. A bystander suddenly shouted, "Gay power!" And others began to sing and chant the lyrics to "We Shall Overcome," while people began to throw beer cans and pennies at the police who were taking away their loved ones. Behind the scenes, people were being beaten within the bar. All of a sudden, though, out struts a Miss Stormy DeLarvery, a biracial butch lesbian. She was handcuffed and repeatedly skipping away and running from the cops who were trying to take her away into the police wagons, as she had been caught by police for dressing outside of her gender and dancing with the other ladies. She paused and looked around at the crowd that was just more or less twiddling their thumbs and causing mischief, all the while growing tense. She suddenly shouted, "Why don't you guys do something?" And with that, the crowd erupted into a riot. Police tires were immediately slashed so that people's peers, loved ones, and friends would not be able to be arrested and taken away to their shame. They could flee, they could run, they could survive. Beer cans continued to be thrown, bricks were picked up, and one of those bricks went directly through the front window of the Stonewall Inn. Upon seeing this, the homeless youth and street queens, as they were called, which were simply trans women and drag queens who were often impoverished and homeless, they looked upon the scene in front of them and began to set fire to the garbage cans that were around the Stonewall Inn in direct action against the discrimination they faced due to being poor. And by 2 a.m., the Stonewall Inn was ablaze. Marsha P. Johnson, a black trans woman and drag queen, came upon the scene and witnessed the whole sight in front of her, from the fire to the riots to the police. She found a shot glass and picked it up and threw it directly at a mirror and exclaimed, "I got my civil rights." The riot went on until July 3rd, nearly a week. And it wasn't just at the Stonewall Inn, it had spread out to surrounding areas such as Christopher Park and Christopher Street. The action didn't end, even though the violence and riots and protests did. 3 different grassroots organizations were formed to bring awareness and basic civil rights to those in the LGBTQ community of New York City. Because of a riot that occurred 51 years ago against police brutality, homophobia, and transphobia, I'm able to safely stand here in front of you through your TV screens, through your computer screens, your iPhone, however you're watching this at this moment. 51 years later, I'm able to safely stand here and announce that my name is Taylor Linloff and I am proudly queer. This is Telile 24/7 Pride Edition.
In a way, it makes perfect sense to begin this week's Telile 24/7 here at the NSCC Straight Area campus. Before our first guest entered politics last October, winning election to the seat of Cape Breton-Canso, he spent many years as an NSCC advisor to the campuses in Sydney and Port Hawkesbury. Mike Kelloway, of course, is the MP for Cape Breton-Canso, and he has been keeping in touch with us at Telile 24/7 with updates on how the federal government is adapting to the COVID-19 crisis and what programs it's been rolling out to help ordinary Canadians, including those living right here. I caught up with Mr. Kelloway a little earlier this week via Zoom. Here's that conversation right now. What has it been like for you? Because Parliament has reopened again, and we're seeing that folks are able to participate virtually in the parliamentary debates. So can you give me a sense on what that's been like for you, being able to work from home, but at the same time doing the work that your constituents selected you to do back in October?
Absolutely. It's certainly been a change from the first couple of months of being an elected MP and being in the House, but I have found virtual Parliament to be an incredible vehicle. We have Canadians all over the country joining in via Zoom, and we have a set designated number of people in the House that are there in person, and I find the collegiality has actually been taken up a notch with Zoom, and the ability to connect MPs from around the country on one platform to be exceptionally great. The opposition has had a tremendous amount of time to be able to ask questions and critique government, which is important in a democracy. And also government has had a chance to talk about in detail the measures that have been put forward for COVID and those that are being worked on. So for me, it's been exceptionally an important time to be a part of, and to be able to ask questions as well. I've asked questions around the fishery, and I've made statements about the riding during this time, and I've actually found it quite interesting. And Adam, one of the interesting things about it, I was on a call with Larry Bagnall, and Larry Bagnall is an MP in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, I believe, and it takes him 23 hours to get to Ottawa. By plane, and then the stops and so forth and so on, all the stops that has to incur with getting the right flights lined up to get to Ottawa. So I'm not suggesting that in-person should ever be replaced. Not at all. I think it's important. It's Canada's house. It's where Canadians that are elected should be and should go. But I also have seen an opportunity to be innovative and then to be adaptable and nimble, and to be open to new things.
Does it feel a little more organic as well, too, to be able to be expressing the concerns from your constituency when you're actually still right in the riding and right on the ground floor?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in awe of Ottawa, the history, the importance as a home of democracy for Canada. That goes without question. But there's something to be said to being able to spend just a little bit more time in the riding, meeting people via, in this case, Zoom, and then also being in the community that you represent, the riding that you represent, while communicating to Ottawa. And here's what it's interesting. what people probably don't see on Parle View, where they can watch the House proceedings or when we have committee work, we are asked as parliamentarians to be on the platform a half an hour before it goes live to the public. And what I've seen is a heck of a lot more collegiality when everybody's on the platform and they're talking before we go live. So you'll have Liberals talking to Conservatives, Conservatives talking to Green, NDP talking to Liberals.
And I imagine those relationships are especially important in a minority situation as well, too, where everybody is depending on everybody else to be able to keep the government going.
You better believe it is. Relationships like, for example, Adam, I'm on the Health Committee and the Justice Committee. The Health Committee did not miss a beat in meeting from March 13th to now. In fact, we're meeting over the summer months. And the reason why is that the focus of our Health Committee has changed from what was going to be its study on palliative care, and we transitioned into COVID and our response as a government to COVID from a health perspective. And you establish relationships again pretty quickly. Like, for example, we're on a Zoom, and Len Weber is a member of Parliament who represents Calgary. He's a Conservative. And we're waiting to go on, so we're doing our mic checks. And I said, Len, you're from Calgary. You're representing Calgary. I got my master's. I received my master's from Calgary. Oh, and I also taught at the University of Calgary. Oh, and then I get an email to Len's credit saying, when we get back to Ottawa, I'd love to have a coffee with you. So these are the things little things that seem little and micro are actually can be macro. Building that relationship and commonalities and things of that nature. And so I totally appreciate that opportunity through technology to be able to develop more relationships. And I think that will lend itself to when we go back to Parliament in September, and fingers crossed we do, that we'll be able to have a little bit more common ties that bind. Because of our conversations with each other. And hey, listen, right now we're part of a generation, whether you're baby boomer, Generation X, Generation Z, millennial, we all have now a common experience. As much as it's a terrible thing that has happened, and it is, that there's also an opportunity to have this common experience and share common experiences and common goals because of it.
And part of achieving these common goals is working together in the House, and you folks were able to get some progress there in terms of the extension of the CERB, the emergency payment that goes out to Canadians who have really been struggling as a result of COVID-19. So that's going to be going through the summer now. Can you give us a sense about why you felt that was important to happen and what that will do for ordinary Canadians, including those living in Cape Breton-Canso?
For sure. From a Canadian perspective and obviously a Cape Breton-Canso perspective, it was very important, and my office and myself were very vocal that we needed to continue to serve for at least a couple of months, and that proved to be the case. Why it's important is that we still have a huge swath of Canadians that don't have a job to go back to. We're opening up the economy, which is good. Where businesses are starting to open up a bit more, which is really good. But there are still a large number of Canadians that do not have access to EI, but need a basic income, basically, for the next couple of months. And we've said from day one as a government, but I've said as day one as a politician and someone that doesn't have necessarily an ideological bent, just wants to serve the community the best way they can and help people, is that we have to do everything we can to ensure that we do not leave people behind. And we understand there's gaps, but we need to do our best to make sure that people remain whole during this crisis. And Adam, we're in in the midst of stage one, and depending on who you listen to, we're coming out of stage one and potentially for a stage two, or there's a whole series of scenarios. But the bottom line is to help Canadians during this time of need. That's why we're looking at CERB and extending it, but also the Canadian wage subsidy ends in late August. And my office has had numerous town halls, focus groups on how the Canadian emergency wage subsidy is working and wanting their feedback. And the reason why is that offices like mine across the country and the government is looking at what's the next phase of the Canada wage subsidy to ensure we keep people working and get people back to work. So those measures of CERB and the Canada emergency wage subsidy, different programs, but they connect in a lot of ways. And so to ensure that we want to get the economy going in a very methodical, health-focused way, we're looking at those options on the Canada emergency wage subsidy. And I have a special affinity for CERB for a lot of other reasons. Before the announcement was made on the whole host of first measures that came out, we didn't call it CERB in our office, but we talked about a basic income to keep people who didn't have access to EI, get them something in their bank account. And we didn't call it CERB, but it is CERB. And so, and I know that I take great solace in the riding of Cape Breton-Canso, who actually provided those recommendations to us, so we sent it to Bill Morneau. And, it's really neat to get a text from a senior policy person in his office the Sunday night before measures were announced to say that was the direction they were going to probably go. And I think that's a testament to the innovation and just the compassion and the empathy of Cape Breton-Canso citizens, that they played a role, I truly believe this, in providing sound advice to the government, and I'm appreciative of it.
Of course, when we talk about basic income, there are a special group of people for whom the summer is their source of basic income and much needed income. That, of course, is the student population in Cape Breton-Canso and across Canada. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you can tell me about the Canada Summer Jobs Program. What's the status of the program during these COVID-19 times?
Well, as you said, the Canada Summer Jobs Program is really, really important to all ridings in Canada, and mine is no different. And we're well underway of notifying those that were successful with respect to their application. Now, with COVID, and it is largely to do with COVID, there's been some nuances and some changes with respect to Canada Summer Jobs. So Canada Summer Jobs can actually be implemented through to the fall, to the end of February, believe it or not, for organizations and youth. And we've seen a huge uptake, especially in my riding, of health organizations that didn't apply in previous years. They applied this time around for obvious reasons to get some support for their organization as they deal with COVID, which is a great thing. But it's also provided some interesting complications, because normally, not 100%, but normally organizations that have applied often kind of get it every year. And now we've seen an increase in organizations. So the program is oversubscribed because of health organizations and other organizations that traditionally didn't take a student on, but now are looking at taking a student on, which means we have the same pot of money and a lot more organizations, which means Service Canada, who does the final, they make the recommendation, they approve or disapprove of an application through their own testing, their own matrix. On the front end piece, we make recommendations, but it goes to Service Canada for approval or denial. So what's happened is that we have had some organizations that were successful in past years that weren't successful this year because it's gone to another group. So what I've done, and so the constituents know, is that I put together a comprehensive letter to Minister of Finance, Minister of Service Canada, Minister of the Prime Minister, and I wrote a piece that was signed off by all Atlantic MPs for the need for a couple of things for the Canada Summer Jobs Program. Some additional funds and some additional flexibility to access money from other programs that focus on youth for the Canada Summer Jobs Program. I also had 60 seconds. I had 60 seconds to make a pitch to the Prime Minister. And I did it in 50. So I had 10 seconds to spare. But he acknowledged that there are some challenges this year with the Canada Summer Jobs Program, that they're looking into it, and they're looking at coming up with some solutions probably in the next couple of days. So again, that's a result of meeting with quite a few constituents on, number one, the benefit of the program, and number two, the challenges this year with some organizations not getting summer employment. So my job as an advocate, as a parliamentarian, is to always, number one, first and foremost, is advocate for my constituents. So with the Prime Minister, I did that. With the Minister of Finance, I did that, and the Minister of Employment Services and Development Canada. So my understanding is that in the next couple of days, and I don't know what these changes are or what these benefits will be, I can tell you that what we put forward as an office to say additional investment and the ability to tap into this, what's called Canada Youth Services Core money for organizations that didn't get summer employment this year, to tap into that program and that money. That was our recommendation. So, but I'm very, very confident the Prime Minister has heard us loud and clear, and he recognized, and he did say, Mike, I hear you loud and clear on Canada Summer Jobs. So that's such a great program, but the challenge has been oversubscription in most, if not all, the ridings and the same money. So we're working on it, and I'm very confident we're going to have a solution in the next day or two.
We're at a very, very specific and very delicate point in terms of Nova Scotia and its relationship to COVID-19. Some reopening has happened for both businesses and for public spaces. We're now down to no active cases in the province that we know of, and no remaining cases. So it's a turning point for Nova Scotia, but also a very difficult point as well, as we seek to be able to keep social distancing running through the next stage of the pandemic. So what are the items that have your focus, apart from, we've talked from CERB and we've talked about the Canada Summer Jobs Program, what are some of the other topics that really have your focus at this particular stage?
I think most Nova Scotians understand that we're in a transition here. One of the things that it does, keep me up at night for sure, is to make sure that Nova Scotians and people in Cape Breton-Canso understand that the practices that Dr. Tam spoke to in February, March, April, May, and the first part of June are still in play with respect to social distancing. That's essential and important. The reason why is that we are in stage one. There is, prognostication that there will be a stage two. So we need to do our best and just do our best to social distance and do those things that Dr. Tam has mentioned around washing hands and wearing masks and things of that nature. I know it's hot and I know it's summertime, but you still need to ensure that you're following those measures, because you're protecting yourself, but you're also protecting other folks. The danger of me keep saying this is that sometimes I sound like a broken record. I get it. I do. But these practices haven't changed. Now, what has changed is obviously, the Premier's measures changed last week with respect to groups of 10 and groups of 50 that are outside social distancing. And I think, we need to keep in mind that, those decisions, as far as I know, provincially, were made, by science, the right science data. But we also have to respect that too. And that's where those practices come into play. I would say to the people of Cape Breton-Canso is, spend your money. Spend your money in Port Hawkesbury. Spend your money in Judique. Spend your money in Port Hastings, in Guysborough County, in Antigonish County. Whether it's shopping for clothes, whether it is picking up, which probably might be easier in some ways to do it on Amazon, but spend your money as best you can with, in terms of your local economy, because the local economy needs you now more than ever. It really, really does. We looked at, the tourism sector. There's talks of an Atlantic bubble. There also, we also need to, think about those staycations and taking the proper precautions around, traveling to Ayrshire. Spend a day in Ayrshire. Trust me, it's awesome.
Yeah.
I've done it numerous times. Spend some time in Pumket. You'll be amazed by the community spirit. Reconnect with your riding. Reconnect with your island. Reconnect with your province.
Thank you so much for giving us a few moments today, and we wish you well through the summer and hope to be able to connect with you again on Telile 24/7 very soon. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you to your viewers. Take care.
One of my next three guests is originally from Lewisdale and now works for the Insurance Bureau of Canada in Herring Cove. A second is a Port Hawkesbury autism advocate. And a third grew up on Shubenacadie First Nation and today uses his Twitter feed to help people learn new Mi'kmaq words and their definitions. But they all have two very important things in common. They're both from the Strait area or have relocated to the Strait area, and they're all part of the LGBTQI community and proud of it. Please welcome the first ever Telile 24/7 Pride panel. We are welcoming to Telile 24/7 for our Pride panel, Taylor Linloff from Port Hawkesbury, Bryson Syliboy, originally from Shubenacadie, now in Port Hawkesbury, and Jamus Dorey, originally from Lewisdale, now living in Herring Cove. Hello to all of you.
Hello.
Hey, Adam.
Hey, Adam.
Hi there. Thank you very much for joining me. Because it's Pride Month, and honestly, these are the kind of stories that should be shared inside and outside of Pride Month as well, too. I wanted to have you all in to talk about your individual stories in terms of what it's been like to live in Cape Breton, to live in Nova Scotia, and to live away from the place where you grew up as well, too, and to have your sexuality be a part of your life and to be so intricate to the way you live your life, but by the same token, being able to deal with that within the context of a rural community, both in the past, the present, and looking to the future. So I wanted to begin with you, Bryson, if I could, because we know, for one thing, that Mi'kmaq sexuality and Mi'kmaq LGBTQ is a very different thing than what we experience as white folks, as Caucasians.
Yep.
So I wonder if you could start this off by speaking a little bit about the two-spirit concept within the Mi'kmaq community. Can you tell us a bit about that to start?
Yeah, so basically, being two-spirit, well, here in Mi'kmaqi, for Mi'kmaq people, our two-spirit people were pretty much eradicated through colonization, through residential schools and stuff. So as Mi'kmaq people, we do not have a set guideline of what two-spirit is. So we're not connected to the two-spirit identity here in Mi'kmaqi, but we're in a process of a resurgence of it, of trying to find our identity, of figure out who we are as Mi'kmaq two-spirit people. So we try to gather regularly. I'm part of a group called the Wabanaki Two-Spirit Alliance, and we just are a big support group and trying to find our way, in modern times, who we are as Mi'kmaq people.
Can you explain what the two-spirit concept means, just to put it in plain English in terms of what exactly it means? Or is that even possible?
Well, it is. Basically, it's a blanket term for all LGBTQ people that are Indigenous. It's a identity only to Indigenous peoples. And with being two-spirit, it was coined in, I believe, the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And it's different for every tribe. So, in North America, we have over 500 distinct tribes. So, being two-spirit before colonization was something that was specific for each tribe. So, sometimes they were healers, sometimes they were, shamans and, stuff like that. So, yeah, it's really specific for each tribe. Yeah. So but we don't, a lot of them have different names for the two-spirit people for what the tribe actually, describes them as. But, the two-spirit term is pretty recent. It's modern.
Are you heartened that seems to be a willingness to do this kind of discussion right now within the Mi'kmaq community and with the committee that you're on right now?
It's great to see, our youth you know, being proud Two-Spirit people to, especially on reserves, because, like on our reserves, like the Catholic faith is really prominent. So it's not really accepted, being queer or gay, so, hopefully we're going to be changing that, and I think more education and more acceptance is coming into our communities, but it is slow to start.
Can I ask you then how that compares with your experience growing up and what you found both in terms of where you grew up in Shubenacadie, but also the general community in terms of you realizing your own sexuality and whatever coming out experience that you had? What were those days like for you?
Well, growing up in a rural area, it wasn't really, I guess status quo to be gay. So, it was kind of frowned upon, especially, growing up in the 90s. It wasn't really mainstream at that time. So I remember only having one really out guy in my high school, and he had to transfer to another school because he was bullied too much, right? Yeah, so growing up back home, it was okay, but I've seen it come a long way since I was a youth, so it's pretty good.
All right. We'll talk a little bit more about how far we've come, not too far down the road. Jamus, I'd like to shift it to you if I could. You grew up in Louisdale. You've had a very specific experience. We'll be talking about that soon enough in terms of not only growing up, as Bryson did, talking about growing up in a very Catholic community, but also growing up in a rural community in Richmond County. So can you tell me a little bit about what it was like for you to realize that you were gay and what kind of response you got, if any, when you started being a little more public and a little more prominent with that?
Sure. So I have to say that my experience overall, given that I was, a teenager in the 80s and 90s, was actually very positive, which I believe is likely contrary to what many people think when they think of smaller rural communities. And that may have more to do with the actual person and their character and their moral fabric. Basically, I think that, small town, hometown folks, really do judge people for who they are, in the sense of, how they conduct themselves and how they live their life, authentically and whatnot. And so for me, actually, it actually was quite positive. Now, I was late coming out because nobody struggled more with their sexuality than I did myself with my own sexuality, because it was not something that it wasn't really something that I wanted for myself. And of course, when you're socialized a certain way and conditioned a certain way to think that you're defective or that this is wrong, then, you feel defective and you feel that there needs to be a change or a shift, that you can't necessarily embrace your authenticity and who you are. And so for me, that led me to, waiting till I was almost 28 years old before I came out officially. My experience, both before coming out and after coming out, was incredibly positive, and everybody was incredibly supportive. And, I think that, they embraced me fully in every sense of the word and the expression. And, and for that, I'm eternally grateful. And I know that there's a lot of fear with the coming out process, which is why people remain in the proverbial closet, so to speak. And really the fear is the fear of being rejected and not being accepted and not being loved by your family. Because contrary to what we see here, there are still countries whereby, you know, folks are being thrown off of buildings to their death, and in 2020. So, so for me, I guess, is the advocacy work that's involved in the queer community, whether it's around pride or whatever the case may be, for me needs to continue personally until every person on this globe is free to fully and truly be their authentic selves. And so whether that's somebody that's in Iran or somebody in a country in Africa, the fight is not finished with me until everybody gets to experience the acceptance that they rightfully deserve.
We are not free until everyone is free.
On that note, I want to throw it over to you, Taylor, because it is fascinating for me to think. I mean, Jamus, you talk about coming out at 28, and Taylor, you're 3 years younger, and you've been out for a while now. Can you tell us a little bit about your own personal experience growing up, and when you decided that you needed to let everybody know that this is how it was for you, and what was the reaction when you did?
I don't think I ever really had a closet because my mom knew when I was 3.
3?
You know, my mom knew when I was 3. Apparently, she was brushing my hair one day and she's like, "Yep, this one's different." It's been a toss-up, and it's almost a switch in how I've been accepted. As a teenager, when I figured out I was queer, I was in the local SARIC GSA, which is a gay straight alliance, which is now known as a gender sexuality alliance, to show that's not just a spectrum from one to the other. And I was very well accepted in that, but I wasn't accepted not because I was gay, but I wasn't accepted because I was unknowingly disabled. I wasn't weird because I was gay. I was weird because I was autistic.
Mm.
And then in recent years, since I was diagnosed 2 years ago, it was a case of I'm being accepted for being autistic, but I'm not being accepted as a queer autistic. I actually just had a post go viral after calling out a certain author's major transphobia and ableism toward autistic people, saying it's like, "Hey, I'm here, I'm queer, and I'm a non-binary femme." Everyone's like, "We don't care if you're autistic, but you need mental help if you're thinking that you're non-binary." So it's such a weird switch, and it's a little bit jarring, honestly, but luckily it's a risk I've taken because I grew up not having any role models, because I didn't see myself as an unknowingly queer person, and I definitely didn't see myself in any role models as an unknowing autistic kid either. I actually did a spoken word performance last year for Pride at the Tall and Small Cafe in Antigonish, and one of my poems was about being part of the autistic community, and I had one kid come up because he thought he was the only queer autistic person in Nova Scotia, which is so jarring because that's exactly how I felt for the longest time. So the fact that we're still not represented is still painful, because that just means it's just a cycle.
Almost like you could be part of one community, but you can't be part of two communities. Yeah.
People don't realize there's actually a very large overlap in the autistic and LGBT community. We believe that it might have to do with the fact that gender and sexuality is often very much a social social construct, which as autistic people, the whole point is that we don't really get that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to shift that over to Jamus again, if I could, because it's one thing to talk about being gay and autistic or queer and autistic. You fell into a very interesting category because you were gay, but also Christian at the same time. And as a matter of fact, you were a founding member of an East Coast Music Award nominated gospel group called Four for the Lord, and very involved with the Curcio movement and the Challenge movement, the retreat movement within the Catholic Church. And I remember as well that in 2005, you wrote a letter to the Reporter newspaper that was very critical of the Catholic Church in particular, and about its refusal as an overall body to welcome and accept the LGBTQ community. Wonder if I could get some thoughts from you about the difficult balance you made there, knowing that you'd given yourself to God, but by the same token, that the people in many corners of his churches weren't accepting you as a complete and total person.
It was always a constant struggle. And the struggle was more so the fact that the messaging that I was hearing within the church was that there was something wrong with me, and that I was not truly accepted in that space. And so there did come a time, and that time was right around 2004, 2005, when my son was born. And at that point, I recognized that there was no way that I was going to have him grow up in an institution that didn't support us. So I could not support something that did not support us. And basically, it was around that time where I made the decision to break ties with the Catholic Church. And, it certainly was not a decision that came easily. It was something that I thought long and hard about, and that had been a long time coming. And, part of the decision was also rooted in how the Diocese of Antigonish handled the sexual abuse scandal in Cape Breton, or not handled, I should say.
No.
And the fact that, that money was basically taken from local churches and communities, money that the very, that had been put there by the very parishioners that actually supported the institution. And I just, that was really the final straw for me to kind of break free from that. But I guess if I had one message, things are shifting and changing. And, Liam and I, for the longest time, did attend Bedford United Church here locally, and very much found a welcoming and affirming home there. And so it is possible. The two are not mutually exclusive. And so, my message out there to anybody young that's watching and that may be struggling with this is that, it is possible. Things are changing. There are many churches out there that are affirming these days. The Catholic Church is yet to come on board in that regard, and they may not ever. So I guess the decision is, left to the individual as to whether or not that is the proper space for them, and whether or not they feel accepted and celebrated in that space. And if not, then it's to find a space that will provide that for them.
I want to throw this over to you, Bryson or Taylor. Either of you feel free to jump in on this. Do you get the sense that the churches may be starting to shift a little bit? Did you experience any kind of stereotyping or even outright hostility from churches or from church folk as you grew up? What were your experiences like there?
Growing up on the reserve, like we have the Roman Catholic Church on our reserve, and you didn't really feel accepted in it. Growing up in it, and especially for being a gay person, I felt the message wasn't there for me, and it's still like that on the reserve, like on the church itself. I know, like, my cousin was going to marry her girlfriend in the church, and she wasn't allowed to. So it's kind of sad to see that happen, because I know how great different faiths are doing with striving to become better than what they were. So I wish our churches on the reserve would embrace that a little more.
I had a really different experience. I grew up in the United Church, and as a kid, I remember that my first minister was a woman, so I grew up not realizing the patriarchal ideals and misogynistic ideals and homophobic ideals that many churches and many other religious institutions may have. So it wasn't later until I realized, like, oh, well, wait, there's people that hate us because of religion, and
Mm.
it wasn't something
Yeah.
I realized till later, and I personally experienced it from people. And like, I think it was only like a year or two ago that Nova Scotia had to actually do a major petition because there was a certain church who wanted to come to Nova Scotia to do a conversion therapy themed
Mhm.
camp and like, what's the term, conference, I guess you could call it.
Mhm.
So that was like the big first hit of, wow, this is the reality of it, because I grew up totally oblivious to it. I'm not Christian myself. I end up finding my own path, but it's something I don't know if I were to go into a church, back to the church or anything like that. I don't know if it would be something I would struggle with or not, to be honest with you.
Well, let me turn the conversation over then to how things are changing. We have mentioned that there's some places where it is, or some places where it isn't. And we had a situation just last week where the pride flag had been flying from the Port Hawkesbury Civic Center. And a complaint came in about that to Mayor Brenda Chisholm-Beaton in Port Hawkesbury, to which she responded by going on Twitter and saying, well, here's my pride pin. She took a very public stand about the complaint, and we remember it wasn't all that long ago that the mayor of Truro, Bill Mills, refused to have a pride flag flying in that town. That actually changed in 2016, and now the pride flag is flown there every year. That brought an end to a 9-year battle between LGBTQ advocates and Mayor Mills. Can you tell us a little bit about how you feel that things might be changing in smaller and medium-sized communities around Nova Scotia, and that there may be some more acceptance shown by those at the highest levels?
Yeah, just last year, Port Hawkesbury put the pride flag up for the first time, as well as Queer Prom was the first event for last year. So it's, if anyone's not familiar with Queer Prom, it is an LGBTQ inclusive prom that's welcome to queer youth and their allies to be able to have a space where they can express as their proper gender, go dancing with the same gender or different genders, and that way they feel more safe than a traditional prom. So the Youth Project is now offering that in various rural communities. So that's definitely a good start for youth so that they don't feel so alone and so isolated.
Jamus, your thoughts on this, having lived in this particular path for quite a while now. Obviously, it's not an issue to put a pride flag up or to embrace pride in HRM, but do you feel that the change is getting into rural communities as well?
I believe that there are pockets of people, you know, throughout this province, basically, regardless of the geography, that, you know, may not necessarily agree with, you know, flying a pride flag or whatnot. Hats off to Brenda for how she handled the situation, because the thing is that when you're talking about people who have been marginalized for centuries, you have to exaggerate the norms in order to establish some equilibrium. So things are shifting, Adam, and I think they've been shifting for a while, and I think they will continue to shift. I think there's great momentum in the communities across Nova Scotia, and I have seen great promise that people are rising to the occasion. There's more and more acceptance. There's more and more education. There's more and more understanding these days. Employers are more inclusive today, and schools and education is more inclusive today than it's ever been. You know, we have organizations like the province of Nova Scotia and Dalhousie University that are being recognized as a top 100 diversity employer. And in order to get that designation, there are a number of things that they must do to achieve this accreditation. So there's definitely, you know, some phenomenal champions out there, you know, that are fighting the fight and that are helping us advance, you know, what we've been looking for so long, which is basically just to be able to be ourselves. But I will say that one of the things, back to the point about Brenda, is that it is much more impactful when a straight person gets up and advocates on my behalf than when I get up for myself. And so the fact that someone like Brenda was able to say, you know, this is it, and I'm proud to support this community, and this is going to be the way that it is, hats off to her. for that, because it's so important. Exactly.
Like, we're tired of our lives being a soapbox, so other people really need to make sure that they're standing up to the platform as well.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you brought that up, partly because that brings me the opportunity to mention something that I missed earlier, that Mayor Brenda Chisholm-Beaton has just okayed Port Hawkesbury's first ever Pride March. Yeah, and Taylor here is the key architect of all of that. So this is something that we might not have even envisioned that could have happened in the Strait area anytime in the last few years. So Taylor, there you go. It's coming up this coming Monday, June 29th at 7 p.m. just outside the Port Hawkesbury Civic Center. Bryson, quickly over to you. You talked a little bit about just the idea that people in the Mi'kmaq community are willing to talk about this now, and that you guys are really doing the research and expanding your worldview in terms of the LGBTQ community and the Two-Spirit concept. What does it mean to you in this day and age that you're seeing this type of collaboration happening, that you're seeing that there could be a Pride March in a town like Port Hawkesbury? What's your thoughts on all of this?
Oh, I think it's great. Like, I've wanted to have one here for a while. So it's great that we're actually finally having one come to fruition, and it just gives you like a sense that, it's finally catching on everywhere, and that, I guess, that you're accepted in their community, no matter who you are.
The validation is very important, because as queer people, we've been invalidated for so long. So something as simple as having the approval to move forward with a, Pride March in Port Hawkesbury, in a small ish town in Nova Scotia, is huge. It's huge because it's the validation that we matter and that people support us. And that is huge. Yeah.
If we had to go from throwing bricks and slashing tires as we were being arrested to being allowed to be loudly out about ourselves and have less worry about being harmed, and we don't have to worry about being carted off and if we're put in the newspapers, it's in our honor, not in our shame.
If you had one thing that you could say to anybody within the LGBTQI community right now who is not sure what to do, not sure where to go, and may not understand that things are changing from what you've all experienced, what's the one thing that you would say to any of them?
The main message for me is always to be yourself. Life is short, and embrace yourself, embrace your differences. It's all of those differences that make this such a beautiful, country and province, and that make our communities beautiful. And if I have one regret in my life, is that I didn't come out sooner. And because you never get that time back. And I will say that one of the saddest things that I have witnessed in my 48 years is watching people go about their lives and not being able to be themselves, not to truly be who they are. And unfortunately, some people die not being able to have been themselves. And I think that what an incredible waste, because we do only have one life to live here. And I think that we should make the best of it. But the biggest piece of advice would be love yourself, be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself, and come on out and have a great life.
Taylor, what are your thoughts on this? What are you saying to people who, like yourself only a few years ago, weren't sure where to turn?
I'm looking down at the bracelet my late father gave me, and I think I don't know if it'll be able to show up on camera, but
yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
Be proud.
All I have to say is be proud. I'm going to use his words.
You will go through hardships, but be proud of who you are, as Taylor said. And, like what we're doing in the Mi'kmaq community is looking out for our future generations. So what we're going through, what we're figuring out right now is going to be easier for the next 7 generations, So I guess, we're just looking out for the future.
we will finish up by giving you all a chance to kind of promote yourselves a little bit, but also promote any resources that you feel might be helpful. And I want to start with you, Taylor, because you're very busy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, everywhere else. You've covered the gamut. Just give your details. Basically, where can people catch up with you if they want to connect with you?
If you're interested in learning about the intersections of being autistic and disabled, as well as feminism and LGBT identity, you can find me on various social media as Taylor Linloff, Aspirational Autistic. And if you want to come out and help support the straight area rainbow community, the LGBTQ community, and the two-spirit community of Mi'kma'ki, you can come see us on June 29th, which is a Monday. We'll be meeting at 7 p.m. at the Civic Center and doing a sidewalk, socially distanced, important march in honor of Stonewall, celebrating how far we've come and looking forward to the future.
Okay. Bryson, I'll ask the same thing to you, and I know you're busy on Twitter and Instagram. I love your handle, Bryson the Gative.
I love that so much.
So where can people find you on social media?
I'm mainly on Twitter and Instagram. So on Twitter, I go by Arnell Labrador, or Bryson the Gative. Just search that up. I do a lot of intersectionality with racism and being gay. Because that there's a lot of that happens. A lot of racism that happens in the LGBTQ community. So I try to combat that a lot. And on Instagram, I'm Gative from Mi'kma'ki. I just post a lot of pictures, or I do my Mi'kmaq word of the day. So yeah.
And I've learned quite a few there, and of course, I will say to you to say Walanan. Thank you for being a part of this as well. Jamus, I know a lot of what you've said is basically on your Facebook page, and I mean, that's you airing your thoughts, but are there any resources that you would direct anybody to that has any questions, or, if they do want to connect with you, how can they do that?
Certainly they can connect with me through Facebook or Facebook Messenger. I am on Instagram as well under Caper As far as a resource, there are a number of resources in a lot of the local communities, and some of them come and go. But I will say that one of the resources that I think that's been around for a while, that's been doing a tremendous amount of work here, based in Halifax, but I think they do work right across the province, is the Youth Project, and they do a lot of work with both people around with sexual identity or sexual orientation and gender identity. Gender expression as well.
The Youth Project is a nonprofit organization. If it's okay to say, if you are able, please consider donating to them to help. They provide GSAs, they do sleepaway camps, and they also provide gender-affirming items for trans youth who may not be able to safely order them for themselves.
This has been terrific. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I think our viewers have probably learned a lot in just the last few minutes as well, too. So, listen, thanks to each and every one of you for taking part in our Telile Pride panel tonight. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Adam.
All right. Jamus Dorey from Herring Cove, originally from Lewisdale. Bryson Syliboy, originally from Shubenacadie, now in Port Hawkesbury. And Taylor Linloff, originally and currently in Port Hawkesbury. They are our Telile Pride panel. And that wraps up our special Pride edition of Telile 24/7. Thanks to all of my interview guests, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. If you have any ideas for future stories or interviews, feel free to call me or email me. The information is on your screen right now. Make sure you follow Telile Community Television on social media, and our YouTube channel now has every single episode of Telile 24/7, along with special features and interviews from the show, and a lot of new programming that our Telile folks have been working very hard on in recent days. I'm Adam Cooke. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week with a brand new edition of Telile 24/7.